Welcome to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. Each week, Matt, Kurt, Jerry, and the occasional special guest explore how the trauma-informed paradigm challenges traditional beliefs and approaches concerning a wide variety of areas. This podcast addresses psychological trauma in an educational manner and is not designed to replace mental health treatment. If anything in this podcast makes you feel uncomfortable or anxious, please talk to a mental health professional.
Welcome to episode 61 of the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. I'm here with Jerry today. Kurt unfortunately couldn't make it, but I'm here with my good friend in person in beautiful Pasadena, 80-degree California, with Mary Donnelly-Crocker to talk about her work of creating Pasadena as a trauma-informed community. And I'm so excited. I've got to be part of Mary's efforts for the last, this is year number 3. We've been doing this. So not only do I get the treat to come to this beautiful community, and she always brings me out here in November, December, this time of year where it's starting to get a little chilly in Colorado, but it's always seems to be 85 degrees in California. So, just got done with a great group of people talking about self-care. It's our second in a 3-part series out here over 3 months. And so I'm excited to talk to Mary today. We'll give her a chance to give a more formal introduction of herself. But I'd like to start out with the bright, shiny objects of the week this week. So Jerry is back in Colorado. So Jerry, what are some things you're thinking about today?
You know, I read, I get a magazine that kind of a positive health magazine, and I read an article about a gentleman who just passed away in Pittsburgh. So with all the, you know, the trauma that's happening in Pittsburgh, the story was about a gentleman, and every week he used to go to the children's hospital and he would shine shoes. And he shined shoes for like 32 years. And the money he would donate back to the children at the hospital. And when they calculated what he had donated, he donated over $200,000 over this period of time.
Wow.
And I thought, really, when you think about random acts of kindness to kind of counteract this concept of trauma, it was a really nice story. It made me feel good, and I think there are certainly those types of people out in the world who are truly looking to enhance the welfare of other people in some ways for their own well-being. So it was a very moving story.
Such a cool story. Very cool. So I'm going to use my bright, shiny object to kind of introduce my friend here. And because I talk about Mary, she may or may not know this when I travel around the country as an example of someone who learned about trauma and the research and the adverse childhood experience study and didn't just sort of say, what's this mean for me? What's this mean for my organization? But as one person, and I know Mary will say she has a great team, and she does have a great team that she surrounded herself with, but really said, how do we make our community trauma informed? And so my bright shiny object this week is Mary and all the people who heard this and said, we got to do something about it. And whenever I think a lot of people sit in these trainings and they hear this research and they think it's pretty amazing, and yet it's like all these social changes might seem too big. And I think Mary gives us a great example that we can explore through our podcast today about the power of one person taking this and trying to take this information to transform a community. So Mary's my bright shiny object of the week.
Wow, I don't think I've ever got a bright shiny object before.
You're special. And so Mary, I'd like you to do a more formal introduction of yourself, young and healthy, and just kind of, what you've been thinking about lately around this movement and your work before I start to ask you some questions about maybe your larger effort, but just kind of things that you're thinking about right now, and give us a little bit of a more formal introduction of you and Young and Healthy.
Okay. So I have been at Young and Healthy for 29 years. Really long time.
Started when you were 12.
I was 12. But before that, I worked inpatient pediatrics, and I was a child life specialist, which works on all the psychosocial issues that have to do with kids in the hospital. So it could be anything from, having a blood draw to their own death. And so I was pretty tuned into all the psychosocial stuff, and I was on the child abuse team there. And then I came 29 years ago to Young and Healthy. And it's a very different kind of work here. The work I did before was much more deeply emotional, and this is more mental and problem solving. The good thing about this work is that nobody ever dies here, which I really like in work, because in my old job, a lot of children died. So this is a plus not to do that. But what we have been able to do, I think, with the work that Young and Healthy does, which is maybe my favorite thing, is connect people from different worlds who might never meet each other, even though they live a mile apart from each other. And that we really work on connecting people, whether it's a kid who needs a dentist or someone who needs mental health services, that we make those connections with people. And they literally are people who could live 5 miles from each other and never see each other in their regular life. And so that to me is we have lots of stats on all the things that we've done, but to me, that's the most magical thing we do, is connecting people and then see what happens. And that's what's cool, is you don't ever really know exactly what's going to happen. But when you put people together, cool stuff happens.
Very cool. What are some of the things with trauma that is kind of on your mind right now? Maybe something you've read or something you're thinking about, like that's on the top of your head right now?
I think there's so much amazing work that's being done now that's hopeful, that there's things we can actually do to make things better. And that's sort of top of mind, is like, what can we actually do? When we started these efforts, we really are using a public health model called CAP, Knowledge, Attitude, and Practice. And really, when we brought Matt here, we're really working on knowledge and attitude. That's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to embed knowledge. We're trying to teach people about this science. We're hoping to change attitudes. That's a big one. But the final step in this, and the step that just goes on and on and on, is changing practice. Mm-hmm. And that's really what matters. But we started with the others, and we do have people sometimes who just don't want to hear the other stuff. They just want to go right to practice. And we won't do it. Because if you don't understand the underpinnings of what trauma is and what it can do to our brains and what we personally have to do with it, good or bad, then I don't think you can make changes. I think you have to really understand this in order to change the practices. Lots of people just say, just tell me what to do. It's like, it's not that easy. You have to figure out what to do. So I think the things that sort of top of mind for me is sort of how fast this took off in Pasadena. I'm sort of overwhelmed all the time by how fast it took off. I was not expecting this at all. And how much support we've gotten from it and how many people want to come and hear this. It's amazing to me that people want to hear this. And I think it's filling a void that we didn't even know was a void. We didn't even know we didn't know. And now we know this, we're learning, and we're learning every day how to do things better. And I think that's my bright, shiny object, is that we keep learning new stuff, and we keep changing, and we change how we do our presentations, because now we learned a new thing. And I think the other thing that I'm really loving about this is that we don't have to be perfect, and it's okay to keep changing. We don't have to have it perfect. Now, the schools that I went and taught at the first 2 years ago, I want to do a redo. I'd really like to go back and redo them, because now I know a lot more and my presentation's a lot better. But I think the most exciting thing is that we could be purveyors of hope, and that we could see that things can change. and we can help people change. And to me, that's really cool.
Awesome. And so I wanted to talk about a little bit, and I'll put the link to your great TED Talk up here because I think it's good. But I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit, if people can go into that with a little bit more detail, but kind of what personally a little bit brought you to this work, because I think it's a powerful story of how you sort of came to the adverse childhood experience study. And I know that TED Talk I've shared with a lot of people. So I wonder, just for our listeners, to just get a little bit of a background on a little bit of you and what kind of resonated with you with the ACEs piece of this in a powerful way.
Okay, so I have a background in child development. I was on a child abuse team, and the first time I heard about ACEs and I heard about the studies, I felt like I got hit in the stomach because, I knew child abuse was bad. This is not, everybody knows that, right? But the studies made the long-term outcome so much worse than I knew. And I was struck and sort of horrified by the science of that it showed just how much worse it was than I even thought. So I was felt like I kind of got sucker punched in a way with that new information. But at the same time, in my personal life, I inherited a 6-year-old. We hadn't planned on this. I have 3 very grown-up kids, and we weren't really thinking about doing the whole parenting thing again, but as they say, stuff happens. And a couple deaths in our family, and my husband and I ended up with a 6-year-old. And as I learned more and more about ACEs and trauma, I realized how devastatingly impacted this little kiddo was by trauma. And that so much of the behavior that we were seeing just, in our living room, it's hard to tell. Does he have a learning disability? Does he have some fetal alcohol stuff going on? Is it all trauma? Because the symptoms are all the same. So what is it? Which one is it? And I think because I live it in my home every day, and I go to work and I do this every day, I am like doubly committed to this because I can see in one kid the difference having good help, great therapy, hopefully guardians who love him and get this stuff, and are getting more of it every day. And we understand, some days better than others, but how our behavior really impacts him. And that we have had to change our behavior. Not that we were really mean parents, but with our big kids, but he's so sensitive to any kind of disruption that we can't even say to him, hey, knock it off, like you would say to other kids. You can't use that tone of voice with him. And so we have had to relearn how to parent in a very deliberate way so that he has a chance to heal from his traumas. And so I live it, in my living room every day. And then we come to work and we try and teach people about it. And I do have a lot of funny stories about him because I have a lot of examples how his executive function, isn't so great. And some of the things that we actually kind of laugh about at home because it's better than crying all the time. But I understand why he never puts the silverware back in the same place twice. It just doesn't, his brain doesn't work that way. And I understand why some of the things we ask of him seem impossible for him. And where another kid, it'd be a nothing. So I think it's really helped us understand this one kid and help him feel safe in our home and feel like he's worthy of being loved and he's still kind of afraid to love us. So, he's getting better, but it's still pretty scary to love people when you've had some bad experiences with that. But it's getting better. And I think so, I kind of live it in both of my worlds all the time. And it's also why I need vacations, but because I live in both worlds all the time. But it's been an interesting parallel to be doing both at the same time. And I do talk about that in my TED Talk, how these worlds kind of collided for me.
Yeah. And I really encourage people to take a moment to listen to that. Like I said, we'll put that in the show notes as well. It's a really great watch. So Jerry, let me kind of throw it to you, and then we'll I'll throw it back to Mary. But I've been fascinating, and listeners to the podcast or people that have heard me talk on trauma know that I do see a social justice component to this, of a need to look at, as much as need to look at how we run schools, how we run programs, our interventions. There's also a need to really look at some of the policies in our communities as well. And Jerry, I wonder, just, in your thinking and years of thinking about this, has the concept of a trauma-informed community sort of come up in your work, in your thinking in any way? And if so, sort of what are just some thoughts that you've had on this? I know you've done so much work on the organizational piece, but you've also, I know even when I was working with you years ago, spent a lot of time at the state capitol doing a lot of advocacy as well. So just love to get your thoughts on, when you hear the word trauma-informed community, does that resonate for you in any way?
I've been involved with a number of projects, one in Philadelphia, another one in Maryland, where communities have taken this on, they're kind of looking at disseminating this information and creating shared language across public health, looking at schools, looking at physicians. I think that it's certainly a worthwhile endeavor. What ends up happening sometimes with these projects, one is it takes a lot of energy and resource. So it's a beautiful thing that you have your organization that could take on this kind of networking project, because it's costly to kind of be the, I heard a term the other day, it's the backbone, right? So you're the backbone of this kind of organism out there that's becoming trauma informed. But I also think it's very important that sometimes when people hear about the ACEs studies, we know that it's a pretty simple explanation for why things are happening, because lots of people who have ACEs are fairly resilient. And that has a lot to do with the relational connectedness that people have that can buffer them from these experiences. So I think that, this concept of understanding how adverse experiences impacts development and functioning, but also this connectedness can become a buffer for the community against that. So I think that when I've worked on that, that's really this issue of how do we, in some ways, reduce the risk for people in the community, and the best way to do that is create connections. So I think that that's really when we were talking earlier, you said you used to have a resiliency program, and I would challenge you that you probably still do.
Probably do.
Right?
Yep.
So I think that's when I looked at these community efforts, and we did one in Denver, a small, and it wasn't around ACEs, but really bringing community together to create some relational connectedness, really in some ways was itself a self-help, self-care process to help people feel more a sense of hope, and feel more resourced as they do this kind of work.
Great, absolutely. And let's take that, Mary, to you. I know you're I think the one person that ever found me on a website.
I have to credit Whitney for that.
Yeah, it's like I have my online presence. Yes, but I kind of, as you even as you started thinking about this, always. I may have come in when you started thinking bigger, but knowing you well enough over the years we've known each other now, I imagine there was a little bit of that big thinking pretty much from the first few moments of trauma informed in your consideration of it. So I just tell our listeners, when you contacted me 3+ years ago now it's been, and said, we want to create, and I love every time you say this out loud at the beginning of the training, Pasadena is a trauma-informed community. What kind of starts that and what drives that? So from kind of a strategy point of view about your work and going about making this a reality.
Well, I think the initial research is really what sparked it, because I'm a kind of a science geek too. I mean, it's like it's so amazing to me. It just what we know about the brain now, and what I have a master's in child development. I never learned any of this stuff. None of this. I mean, nobody knew it then, right? So I think that that's what kind of got me going. But then, taking those next steps really had a lot to do with internal discussions we had at our own organization. When we got all this feedback from the community about what they thought was needed in the community, but then our own board, there was a program committee of the board, and we sat around literally my dining room table wrestling with, what should we do? What should we do? Oh my God, there's all this research. What do we do? And decided we're going to do something. We don't really know what it is. And I think one of the things that I've certainly learned about myself, much to the chagrin sometimes of my board members, is that I'm pretty comfortable with ambiguity, that I don't have to know all the answers to start. And I know sometimes that drives people kind of crazy, because they say, yeah, but what are you going to do in 6 months? And I go, I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do in 6 months. We're going to do this, and we're going to see what happens. And for some people that drives, it isn't all certain for me when I start things. And this is not just in this program, we're in other programs too. I just kind of have faith that it's going to work out. And if it doesn't, oh well, nothing bad's going to happen if everything isn't perfect. So I think, it's not an understatement to say that having support to do this work means a lot. If I didn't have the support of especially a couple people on my staff who are, have taken a deep dive into this, but to my board, if they didn't believe this was important, and I couldn't do it. First of all, literally I couldn't do it because of the board. But we got some really early encouragement. I remember at a meeting, it was on a Sunday night at my house, and I was walking out the door with one of the guys who's on my board, and he's an emergency room doctor, and he said, all this stuff we've been doing for years, linking kids with doctors, that's been really important work, and that we're so proud of that. He says, but this might be the most important thing Young and Healthy ever does. And I was just struck by that. That's like, wow, this is like more important than I even thought, So I think that, and there's nothing like success to keep you going either. When things work, you want to do it again, right? And so we've gotten so much great feedback from people that it's easy to keep going, and it's easy to tell the story because we're passionate about it, we believe in it. And one of my mentors early on, the woman who was actually one of the founders of Young and Healthy, I remember when I first tried to start raising the money, and I was very nervous about this, she said, do the right things and money will follow. And that has certainly been the case with us. We have gotten more support than I could have ever imagined, financial support to do this than I could have ever imagined. And it doesn't seem to be stopping. We seem to keep getting it. I think it's now taken on this life of its own, and it's very fun. It's really fun, and it's fun to see all these very disparate kinds of people in the community all wanting to learn this. So we have, one of the things that I talk about is interesting is that there's sort of this whole body of knowledge and gurus in healthcare around trauma-informed care. And then there's this whole other body of knowledge and gurus in education around healthcare. And a lot of those people don't actually know each other that well. But where Young and Healthy stands, we do both. So we're looking at the education system and we're looking at health. So we're sort of in the middle of both of those. So I get to know geeks on either side, which is really fun. And I think we can talk that talk on both sides. So it appeals to teachers, and it appeals to principals and superintendents, but it also appeals to the emergency room department at our hospital. And so that's where I get really excited, that I see people from really different parts of our community wanting to learn this. Last year, we even trained all the swim instructors at our big swimming pool, our big swim program in Pasadena. It's a really big, huge program. And we taught all the swim instructors about this. And some of those swim instructors came back to us and says, oh my gosh, we're changing how we're teaching kids how to swim based on what we learned about this. So who would have thought? Who you think, okay, mental health people will get this, but swim instructors, no, they get it too. And so that's what I love, is that it kind of reaches a cross section of people we wouldn't have even dreamed about. And maybe that's because I'm a fool and I'm not afraid of not knowing what I do, what I'm not doing.
Very cool. And so one of the things, you know, that I've really enjoyed about coming out here is, you know, it was these 3-day trainings, but also, I mean, I thought it was great that all of a sudden we were training teachers in Pasadena Unified School District, and you know, Mayor, I don't know, Danny and Mike from El Monte School District came out. So I just love the fact that how, you know, and I think we've probably all seen this in different ways in our career, how if presented in a you know, effective way. And I know for every 1 hour presenting I do here in Pasadena, you all probably do 20, 30, 40, 50 or more around the community, but how this is contagious in a way, how if we hear trauma, but hear the positive message that, boy, if we approach things a little differently, all these symptoms that horrify you that are possibly out here don't have to happen. You know, I think there's so much hope in that message, and to see that, I think, take on as a community. And LA County is such an interesting place because it's so ginormous that I know that we've had a lot of people, at least in these trainings, from all around the area as well. So it's cool to see that sort of spread over time too.
And it's been one of the things when we're doing the trainings that we're doing, of course, we learned from you, and then we, you know, stole some of your stuff and then created some of our old stuff. But, you know, one of the things we really tried to do, because we only have an hour, you know, when you're going to do a elementary school teachers, you got an hour. You don't have 18 hours like this is really tried to make this accessible and not overwhelming. And what we wanted was for people to walk out the door and be able to do something that day about this. And I did a conference last week for the TK teachers. There was a state conference, and I did one of these there. And this woman came up, she says, you know, we've been trying to do this, find speakers to do this in our county, is not here. She goes, but everybody's so scary. She said, it's so depressing. People walk away feeling overwhelmed. And she says, we walk away from this saying, oh, I could do that tomorrow. You know, if we just everybody takes a little bite size, we don't have to save the world, just save a little piece of it, you know? And if we can get that message that it's doable and it doesn't have to kill you, then more people would do it if they understood how simple some of the stuff really is to do. You know, you could just be nicer, and that's a huge step right there.
Yeah, I kind of wonder from your perspective too, as you've seen this. I mean, I imagine, you know, as you've seen this in Denver, because one of the things, you know, I think back to like 2004, 2005-ish, when we were working together and you introduced this, and I caught the fever for it, so to speak. I wonder from your perspective, as one of the early sort of adapters, working with Bruce Perry, you know, being on, sort of having your hands on the pulse of this movement from the very early stages, sort of maybe from a Denver level. I'd love to get your thoughts as you travel the country too and talk about this stuff. You know, what are some successful things that you've seen help it take hold in communities? I wouldn't say Denver is necessarily trauma informed, but I'd say, you know, as a community, we've had a lot of people talking about this, probably more so than most other communities around the country, especially for our size. So I kind of wonder what you've seen happen as far as maybe locally, and then, you know, I'll follow that up with bringing that picture back out a little bit.
You know, I think Mary kind of, she talked a little bit about it, and that for most kids, most individuals, especially children, to do it, what they need is what Winnicott talked about, a good enough parent, a good enough person, right? And so really understanding what does that mean to be good enough, right? Is to be sensitive and attuned and responsive to the needs of another person, all right? As opposed to me coming in with my own agenda and imposing it on you, right? And so this little change that Mary's talking about is really, how do I spend a moment just getting to know the person I'm interacting with on the other side of this? But there are individuals who need more than good enough, right? And so in a way, in order to create a healing, reparative relationship, Mary didn't ask her son to change. She changed. She said, what do I need to do to get better at holding this and managing this so I can create the space for this child to kind of move to more higher levels of functioning, right? So, I think that thing about getting knowledge and then looking at your attitude and then making the change is a really nice model to kind of look at that. And I think that this concept of, when I hear this information, I want to immediately go to solutions, right? And the solution is usually focused on changing the child, changing the adult, changing the student, whatever profession you are, you look outside. But I think Mary kind of said it, this is about first looking inside and changing how we're responding, not necessarily changing how our client or our students are responding or our children are responding. And so I think that awareness is really important. And so, in the little things that Mary has said, she's touched on a lot of really important things that you see over and over again in repairing, is that immediately somebody wants to take this knowledge and the expectation is, oh, now that we know this kid will behave. Or now that I know this adult will come in and do exactly what I want him to be able to do. And that's really not what this trauma-informed approach is all about.
Right.
Well, I think it's so much more about accepting and not being afraid to love people and their flaws, because certainly we have them. When we have a whole parent education enrichment part of this too, and we don't start off talking about trauma at all. We talk about brain research and how their brains work and how the kid's brain works and why when you're all activated back here and the kid's all activated and why it doesn't work. And we teach parents about their brains and the kids' brains. And it's amazing what is happening with those parent groups. But the person, Liz, who does these, she always gives parents homework. And she always tells them she's giving them homework. And, they groan because she's giving them homework. And the homework is always, go do something fun with your kids. It's not learning how to do homework better. It's not, learning, do your chores. Go have fun. The most important thing you can do with that kid is to have a great relationship. And so, they think she's the expert, which she kind of is, but she recognizes they're the experts in their own children, and then just tries to shore them up to say, hey, it's okay to go have fun with your kids, even if they didn't do all their homework. Mm-hmm. That having fun matters to how families function. And those seem like little things, but what we hope it's making these shifts for families, that they're more accepting of themselves even, that they can enjoy each other.
Yeah. And I think that positive experience, because I think for a lot of parents that, so some of the kids, I think the kids end up in systems or become that kid that's struggling in school. I just think they get all this negative feedback all the time about their kids, and to I think give them the encouragement to have those positive experiences is, it sounds like a little thing, but potentially life-changing in the midst of that as well. So it's fun that some of the solutions to these big issues are really not that complex, and yet, again, that there is a complexity there that requires us to be very creative, especially again with the community-based approach as well.
Well, they're complex issues for sure, and I think it's good that we understand the complexities of them. But the actions you can take sometimes are pretty simple.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are pretty complicated, but some of it can be simple. And I think I say in my talks all the time, we overthink this. Sometimes we get caught up in all the science of it, how geeky, and I love all that stuff. But you know what? Just go play hopscotch with your kid. It's gonna be better. And sometimes we overthink it and we make it too hard for ourselves. And we can tone it down and really make a big difference for kids and their families.
Absolutely. So I want to, you guys both know my thinking a little bit here, but one of the things when I think about trauma-informed community, and I think one of the things that I love about what Young and Healthy is doing is really taking almost this grassroots sort of movement of educating so many diverse groups, making them aware of the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, doing all this great work. And I think that you're starting to get what I see here over and over again when I come back out is this momentum there of this and how important that is. And I wonder, because some of my thinking evolves and sometimes I get frustrated with it, which I get over very quickly, but it's like there's also the top-down piece of creating a trauma-informed community. And I kind of wonder, Mary, from your perspective, and Jerry, I'd love to get your thinking about talking to policymakers. I know you've gone into, done some great work with the school district, which is a large system in and of itself. But how have you, besides creating this incredible knowledge throughout your community, approach the top, the decision makers, maybe even some of the policy makers at a higher level to get them engaged in this process as well?
Well, we actually started at the top. We always knew we wanted sort of our main sort of client to be the school system. That's where the kids are. That's where we wanted to start. But we started with the assistant superintendents and the superintendent, because great if a third grade teacher wants to do this, but if they don't have any support at work to do it, well, you're not going to go very far. So we have actually systematically gone through, this year is the third year, and with this training, all of our public school principals will have been at least had this training. So we have systematically gone from the top down. And then the other trainings our staff is doing at the schools. But if we just thought we needed buy-in. And the other buy-in we needed was we needed internal champions. We needed people who believed in what we're doing. And we have a couple of those. Julie Reynosa, who's an assistant superintendent, she couldn't be here today, but she's our champion. Mm-hmm. And you need someone on the inside. And we know it's taken hold because our school district, the last thing I heard was they're the only school district in California that now has a board policy, which means the school board has to approve it, that talks about a mental health approach, a whole child approach, and a trauma-informed care approach to everything that's done in the schools. So to have it gone from, we're training a few principals and superintendents, to bringing it up the food chain to the school board, that says something, that they're believing in it. Now, there's a lot of practicalities. We still have a lot of work to do. I'm not saying we're all there. But that happens when, now when I'm at things, and I'm on a couple of community committees, one of which I'm with the mayor, and now he can talk about ACEs. He knows what it is, which he didn't know what it was before. And as the mayor, he'll talk about mental health services now, which he didn't do 5 years ago. And so that, you just kind of little by little get in places. And I think if you get the right people hearing the message, they're taking it forward. And then you're just there tagging along to support them and shore them up. Our founder, one of our founding doctors, used to tell this story. I can't believe I'm going to tell the story because I got so sick of the story. But He talks about a story about Desmond Tutu, who was Archbishop in South Africa during the apartheid years. And people would say to Desmond Tutu all the time, he says, well, apartheid's so huge, how can you ever fix this? It's so huge. And Desmond Tutu would say, oh, it's very simple. It's like eating an elephant. You just take one bite at a time. And I think that's how you don't get discouraged either. You take one bite, you take another bite, you take another bite. Sometimes you have to regurgitate, take another bite, but you just keep biting off little pieces. So.
Very cool. Jerry, any thoughts on that when you've worked maybe with people higher up in government or school districts, and how to sort of get their buy-in around this stuff as well?
I think that my experience with legislators and people in government is they get very excited about learning and understanding, and really what they need is people to come forward and help them kind of understand what the issues are in the community and how they can help. So I think when you have a nice short presentation that's not too overwhelming, it allows them to have some knowledge. But more important, I think that people in government oftentimes write policies or are moved by people that are responding to some type of crisis that just happened. Somebody gets hurt in the community, they call the legislator gets up and writes a policy to respond to it, right? So lots of the policies are written not to create health, but to avoid a future trauma, right? And so I think that when you bring something that's in some ways more less crisis driven and more in some ways proactive, it helps legislators be able to talk about some of those things. So that's been my experience with that. The part in the community, I think, is, I think Mary's probably done a great job of creating a volunteer organization of people who are motivated to come together for a cause. Oftentimes, when you're trying to change a system where you have nonprofits, people come from a place of, if I get involved, what am I going to lose? Instead of what I'm going to gain, right? And I think that that's something we really have to challenge. And Matt, when we created our community base, the first thing people always came to is, let me tell you about how hungry I am and why I need to be fed. Once they got their story out and once they feel heard, then they were more able to invest in the cause. But everybody comes who has not been in some ways well-funded, always comes to the table looking for funding, looking to get, what can I get out of this, right? And so you have to have people who are really good at listening to that narrative, understanding, and then helping them engage in this bigger mission that in some ways together we could be more than any of us are individually. Yeah. I think that's the challenge you have. That's the opportunity you have. And it's also the challenge that I have as I try to create some of these kind of community efforts.
I think part of what you're talking about, Jerry, is this sort of theory of abundance. There's enough.
Right.
And I certainly learned that in the fundraising world. It's like, there's enough. We just have to figure out how to get it. But there's enough. And if we go in and if we're willing to share things with other people, and if we're willing to not have to own everything, that idea of the best way to get to be something to be successful is to give away the credit. Who cares who gets the credit? Right. But that's looking at the world with an abundance lens, that there's enough. And if we go through life thinking there's enough, that's a very different world, lens than there's not enough, I need more. Not that I haven't had those days.
but it's a challenge that
It
you
is.
face as you get these things going. And I
It
think
is.
that's where, if you can engage people in a larger mission than their individual survival as a nonprofit or something, is that we're all in this to improve the welfare of the community as a whole, not just my little sliver of that. But you have a role in playing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks like Pacific Oaks College, who's been a great host for us, might have another meeting going on soon. So, but I do want to share a story. I haven't told Mary this as well, but El Monte School District, which is a neighboring community to Pasadena, due to the fact I think you invited Danny and Mike to a recent training, they're having me out for the second year out there as well. So I just spent a lot of time in Southern California, getting to know the area and all the great restaurants. But I was, Danny Heenley was one of the folks that I've been working with, and he told a story which I think, shows the power of what Mary's doing here in such a sort of an indirect, cool way. Is Danny was having, he said, just not necessarily a tough day, but he was just like kind of processing his day at work and thinking about, I think he was coaching a soccer or baseball team that evening. So he was kind of trying to think about what was going on at work and processing that and thinking about what practice was going to be like for the upcoming game. And I believe it was his daughter, I think. It may have been a son, but I think it was a daughter. And it was talking and talking and talking and talking and talking. It's just, sometimes she just talks. I don't even know if she's saying anything at times, but she's always talking. And he said, he turned around to her and said, "Hey, hon, is it okay? Daddy's just got some stuff to think about right now. Is it okay if we're just quiet for maybe 5 minutes?" And he turns to her, and for those who have been in my training, I teach this analogy. And she said to him, "Daddy, it sounds like your cup's full." And I thought it was so cool. And he's in my training, having not gone to that training here. He said, I just made the connection is that training you must have done at Pasadena Unified, that those teachers went and even taught my second grader about the cup analogy. And now my second grader knows that analogy well enough to teach me that analogy. And so, I think that, rarely do you get that, like, it to come full circle like that. That now somebody who's having me come out to train some of their folks out in their district, all of a sudden, the second grader, due to connecting the dots all the way back to Mary, and then the great folks at Pasadena Unified, who has taken this incredibly seriously, ends up with a small elementary school child understanding that her father's need to process what's in his cup. So I just thought that was a good story to kind of go out on, of how sometimes I think, and I hope our audience hears this as well, is you don't always know the little things. And I think, one of the things that I always respect about Mary, your work, and Jerry, your work as well, is, you never know the results of it. I think from a training perspective, where you give the information to, like, the swim folks, we don't always see where that takes folks. And I just think it's so cool that here it ended up in the car with the second grader. And Jerry, I know about your career and how many lives you've touched, and the fact you're the one that introduced me to this, and now I get to be here with great folks in Pasadena, kind of sharing the story that you shared with me all those years ago, which is just, it's kind of cool. And I think that it's, you think about the trauma-informed wave and where it's taken us all, and it's just a pretty neat thing to connect with so many wonderful people around the country who are doing the good work.
I think that story kind of highlights something important, Matt. And one of the challenges you have when we talk about trauma-informed, right? Because what stands out to people is trauma.
Yeah.
And yet, really, this little girl in the car, my guess is she has a fairly good, healthy relationship with her family.
Knowing Danny, I would say yes, yeah.
And how beneficial this kind of approach is, not just for trauma, but for all individuals, right? Is that here's a healthy child who's the ability to have empathy and the ability to see, almost a theory of mind, to see what's happening in her dad's mind. Imagine that in class, that if there's another child who's having a hard time, that the class could see and think, boy, that person's cup is full in class. So this approach is not just for trauma. It's for creating really healthy relational communities. And that's what the goal is. So I think it's a really nice example of somebody who has lots of resources who may benefit from exposure to these concepts.
Wonderful. And Mary, I just kind of want to give you a chance as we kind of roll out here and let the college go about their business. Any words of advice to those that might be sort of in the position you were a few years back when you sort of took this on? What would be some of the things, if there's listeners out there that might be in a position to have a little capacity to try to move this forward at maybe a level outside their organization, whatever that would look like? What would be some suggestions from your success, knowing that Pasadena is a unique place like every community, but just some things that you would suggest people might think about in their own work to make to bring this into their community as well?
Well, I think surround yourself with smart people who have equal measure of smarts and compassion. Try not to be too afraid of not knowing what you're doing, because we don't always know what we're doing. But trust enough in yourself that you could take some of those scary steps without you really knowing exactly what's going to happen. Because if you're doing the right thing, it's not going to hurt anything if you're doing the right thing. And I think don't push the river, it flows by itself. Let it go where it goes. Mm-hmm. And it'll go in places you didn't expect. And as long as you can be open to those changes in how a river moves, it's a great thing. And, go with the flow. I think it's a fun ride. It's a really fun ride.
Absolutely.
Matt, you just described the open self-organizing system.
And we will have that conversation on episode 62. I still have some follow-up questions for you on that one, Jerry, but yes. So I want to thank our listeners. Thanks, Mary.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, just awesome to have you. And I want to thank our viewers again. And as always, you can find resources. Again, I'll put Mary's TED Talk up on the website at traumainformedlens.org. So we'll also throw some discussion questions up there as always too. So I want to thank everybody for their time. Mary and Jerry. Oh, Jerry's dog's making a cameo in the video, so you got to watch the YouTube episode. A cute dog pops in. Thank Pacific Oaks College, a great facility here. I got to know some of the folks at the university or the college over the last couple trainings. Great folks, great mission. And just thank everybody. As sort of a side note too, I think due to scheduling, we may not be able to record on Thanksgiving week. We may still work it out. You may still hear from us, but if we don't, I know, and Kurt wasn't able to make this one too. I know from Jerry, Kurt, myself, I'll even throw Mary in there. I want to wish everybody a happy and safe Thanksgiving. So maybe you'll hear us next week, but we may take a week off. Enjoy Thanksgiving with our family and friends. We hope you do too. And we'll catch you next time with episode 62. Thanks, everybody.